right, guys, welcome back. This week, we're looking at some human geography. Remember, human geography is a study of how human beings relate to geography with natural resources and other things around them. We're really going to look at why people would settle in certain locations. Why do people live together in certain areas? We're hoping today, after the lesson, that you're going to understand why people would do that. What natural resources? What about the climate? What about those weather patterns and the locations of different cities makes them more desirable than others? First of all, let's get started with the vocabulary. Our vocabulary for this week is climate, vegetation zone, natural resources, irrigation, reservoir, maize, obsidian, and alluvial soil. And the places that we're going to focus on this week are Timbuktu, Rome, Baghdad, and the Yucatan Peninsula. Well, hey, let's get started. First of all, when people started roaming the earth, they didn't settle in one place. They had to find resources. They had to find water and food and shelter. So they would move around to find that water, food, and shelter. They didn't stay in one place. They were called hunters and gatherers because they would go to a place and hunt until those resources were done, or they would gather whatever food was there until the resources were done in that area, and then they would move to another place. So they hunted and they gathered and they moved from place to place. There are still some people that live like that. We have people who are nomads that do move from place to place. We're going to learn about Bedouins later on this year that live on the Arabian Peninsula and in northern Africa in some harsh zones where they would move from place to place to find water and food and shelter and things like that. But today we're going to look at more of why people settled in certain places. One of the earliest places that people settled was a place called the Fertile Crescent. You might have in 6th grade learned about Mesopotamia. They're thought to maybe be one of the first civilizations that actually started agriculture or the practice of farming and used irrigation. Irrigation is bringing water from another source to your farms. We're also going to learn through this year and a little bit in this lesson about Mesoamerica and how they had some different farming practices and used different types of irrigation techniques. Today, we're specifically going to look at where people settled in the earth. So let's get started. Let's get started with our own little town of Napomo. I live in Napomo. You live in Napomo. It's a great place. One of the things that I think makes it so special is the weather. It's like 75 degrees and sunny almost every single day. Yeah, it's a little foggy this morning, but it's going to clear up and be 75 degrees, I guarantee, by the end of the day. It doesn't rain too much. It rains enough. It doesn't get too cold. We freak out if it gets in the 40s, and we freak out if it gets too hot for us is in the 90s. It's a very mild climate. Climate, by the way, is the general weather pattern of an area. It's not weather day by day. Yes, we get super rainy days, and one time it kind of snowed. It was more hail, but it looked like it snowed, but that doesn't usually happen. Climate is what usually happens in an area. Another thing I like about Napomo is how close it is to where I work at Mesa Middle School. It's only about 7 miles from Mesa Middle School. And there's a lot of other great stuff about Napomo. But let's look at some of the earlier folks that lived here before us, the Chumash. The Chumash moved to Napomo or settled in Napomo probably for some of the same reasons that we did. Partially because the weather, I'm sure. It's a mild place to live. You're not going to have to worry too much about it being too cold or too hot. The Chumash were seafaring people and lived on the ocean, and we're just a little bit inland from the ocean, but we're close enough. One of their big staples in their diet were acorns. So there was a natural resource. Natural resource is something that you can find easily and readily in an area. It's not something that's brought in from outside, but it's something in that area you can find. And if you look around, there are tons of oak trees where we live in Napomo, and that's where acorns come from. And the Chumash really used those acorns as a food staple in their diet. There's also lots of small and large game. So there's plenty of food around here. Water can be a little bit troublesome, but it is findable in this area as well. In fact, the name Napomo comes from a Chumash word, Napoma, which means foot of the hills. All right, let's move on to our next place. Our next place we're going to talk about is the continent of Africa. The continent of Africa is a great continent. It's a huge continent, and it's a very diverse continent. It's got tons of people, different countries. They've got celebrated kings and queens, tons of natural resources, all sorts of different terrain, all sorts of different types of people, and different natural resources. So let's look specifically, though, at the vegetation zones in Africa, and we're just going to look at a few. Vegetation zone is what it sounds like. It's a zone where there's different types of vegetation. The first type of vegetation zone I'm going to talk about in Africa is in North Africa. It's a desert. It's the Sahara Desert. So there's a desert vegetation zone. It's funny, that's the first one I talk about because there's not a lot of vegetation for obvious reasons, not a lot of water in a desert. The second one is a savanna. A savanna is a flat grassland, maybe a few trees here or there, but mostly grassland. Third is tropical rainforests and jungles. You can find those in Africa as well. And then the other thing I'm going to talk about is called the Sahel. It's a zone between the savanna and the tropical lands where it's still got grasslands, but there's more trees and vegetation than just the grasslands. There are also large rivers in Africa like the Congo and the Nile and the Niger River. We're going to talk specifically, not necessarily about the Niger River right now, but we're going to talk about our first city this week, Timbuktu. Timbuktu is located on the Niger River. During its heyday, during its grand times, it was a hub for learning. It was a hub for trade. There were lots of natural resources in the area to use, and it had such a great location. So let's get into that a little bit. Located on the Niger River, obvious reasons, there's water, which if you have water, you can irrigate, again, bring water from that river to your crops so you can grow food. There's water. People need to drink water. There's other natural resources like gold and copper and iron and millet, which is a type of wheat. So it's full of different natural resources. It also is located within trade routes between North, South, and East Africa. So there was always a lot of people that were coming into Timbuktu to trade. And it was really a full, prosperous city for learning. There were libraries and mosques and all sorts of people that would congregate there. Let's look at our second city, Rome. We're talking about ancient Rome. We're talking about before the Common Era and the beginning of the Common Era through about, the year 700. Rome is located on the Italian peninsula between the Tiber River and the Apennines Mountains. It's very sheltered because it's between those two. So back then it kept them safe from invaders. The climate of Rome is very similar to our own. It's called a Mediterranean climate. The Italian peninsula is located in the Mediterranean. The Italian peninsula is located in the Mediterranean Sea, and that generates what's called a Mediterranean climate, which means they have warmer, dry summers, cool and mild winters, and it rains during the wintertime. And it doesn't really get too hot or too cold in that area, kind of like where we live. It rains in the wintertime, and it's not too hot in the summertime, but it's not rainy in the summertime. And we actually have that same type of climate. So it's a nice place to live in that sense. Being where it's located in the Mediterranean Sea, it's also was a big hub for trade. So people were coming in and out of the city, spending money and trading, well, not spending money, but trading goods. So, it had climate, it was protected, it had water from the Tiber River and a center for trade. The last city we're going to talk about is Baghdad. Baghdad is located in between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. So first of all, two rivers. Second of all, it's located in what was referred to as the Fertile Crescent. It was referred to that because, again, as I stated before, it was some of the first places where people believed that there was agriculture being developed and irrigation. The soil was really fertile because it was located between these two rivers. It was a great place for learning. They had houses of wisdom where you could learn math, science, astronomy, poetry, art, all sorts of things. These were kind of like colleges, but it was more people getting together to share ideas and learn from each other. Finally, it was a hub of trade on the Silk Road between the East and the West. So it was also another trade city that was full of people and life. Well, that's it for your lesson. What we're hoping that you can do now is tell us why you think Timbuktu, Rome, and Baghdad were such popular cities during their time. What were some qualities that we talked about that made them so desirable? We've added some more resources. If you want to go deeper and add some more things into your response, you're more than welcome to do so. But we're looking for a short paragraph on why you think those 3 cities were so desirable and were so popular. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.